Hi, you're listening to the Literary Atlanta podcast. I'm your host, Allison Law. As I mentioned in last week's episode, while we took a little time off over the summer to recalibrate a bit, we never stopped recording interviews. There were just too many great books and amazing author events to cover. So, in this week's episode, we're going to share one of those events with you. Straight ahead on episode 44, you will listen to my conversation with Atlanta author Amber Brock about her new novel, Lady Be Good. That's coming up next on Literary Atlanta. Atlanta is a book town, home to avid readers and host to some of the finest writers and storytellers on the planet. That's my thesis statement, and this podcast provides the supporting details through behind-the-scenes anecdotes, author interviews, and all of the ways that you can experience the rich literary landscape right here in Literary Atlanta. I'm recording this on National Book Lovers Day. That's a hashtag, folks. National Book Lovers Day. It's also 22 days out from the AJC Decatur Book Festival, one of my favorite events of the year. And the author that you're about to hear from is one of the featured presenters at the AJC Decatur Book Festival. Amber Brock is the author of the new novel, Lady Be Good, a work of historical, women's, and literary fiction that follows on the heels of her critically acclaimed debut novel, A Fine Imitation. Amber considers herself a history aficionado, taking every opportunity to travel abroad and take in history and art museums. She teaches British literature and creative writing at the Atlanta Girls' School. She received her undergraduate degree from Furman University and a master's degree from the University of Georgia. She lives in Smyrna with her husband, who is also an English teacher, and their 3 rescue dogs. What we're about to play for you is an interview that was recorded on July 12th. It was Amber talking to me at the Writers at Wrecking Bar. Now, Writers at Wrecking Bar is a monthly fiction series at the Wrecking Bar Brew Pub in Atlanta, which is right around the corner from Acapella Books. Acapella Books is the independent bookstore that sells for Writers at the Wrecking Bar. So it was an opportunity for me to plug into the PA system and do a little bit of Name That Tune. So to get you prepared for Amber's appearance at the AJC Decatur Book Festival Labor Day weekend, enjoy this conversation, this recorded interview that I did with her in July about Lady Be Good. Just one quick note, the first voice you're going to hear when we go into the recording is that of Frank Reese, the wonderful owner of Acapella Books, who introduced Amber and me at the Writers at Wrecking Bar series.
So again, every month, we present at least 1, sometimes 2 authors, sometimes local, sometimes touring from other parts of the country. And we put them in conversation with somebody from Atlanta who covers the book scene. And tonight, our moderator covers the Atlanta book scene like nobody else. Allison Law, the hostess. The hostess of the Literary Atlanta podcast is going to be interviewing our guest of honor. And I'll say a quick word on a personal note about Amber. I had the pleasure with my wife, we realized 3 years ago already, of going to Cuba with Tom and Sandra, Amber's in-laws. And shortly after that, actually on the trip, they said, well, you need to meet our daughter-in-law. She's got her first novel coming out, and come meet her. And we were guests at her book launch party then, and now her second book, we get to host her. So it's great the way that worked out. So if you're not already on our email list, you should go to our website, acapellabooks.com, and sign up for it, and you'll know about Writers at the Wrecking Bar and other events we do around town. Our next Writers at the Wrecking Bar is August 23rd. It'll be 2 authors, one local, Christopher Swan, who, like Amber, is a local English teacher at high school here in Atlanta, and he's the author of Shadow of the Lions, which is coming out in paperback next month, and he'll be here August 23rd, along with an Athens-based writer, Amy Bonifon, whose first book is a collection of short stories called Wrong Heaven. So that'll be right here again on August 23rd. And like I say, every month we do this, and we do events all over town. So we hope you'll get on our email list and join us for more literary excitement and fun. And without any further ado, I'm going to bring Allison Law and the author of Lady Be Good, Amber Brock.
Well, welcome everybody. How many are teachers in the crowd? Teachers, school, teaching professionals in the crowd. How many of you have already read Amber's book? 2, 3, 4. Okay, good. Oh, you're halfway through? How did you put that thing down? They do get in the way. Well, thank you so much for being here. And I will let you know that we are recording our conversation for a future episode of Literary Atlanta. So if you like to listen to podcasts, you can listen to it on the website. It'll be available wherever you like to get your podcast. And I'm so excited that I get to finally talk to you. We were just reminiscing. The first time I ever saw you speak was it a year ago? A little more than a year ago at the Atlanta Writers Club event?
Yeah. I want to say close to 2 years now, which is crazy.
Yeah, that went quick.
Yeah.
And you were talking about a fine imitation and teaching writer's craft to that group there. But I find that this book is very musical, so I thought we could play a little bit of Name That Tune. You guys remember Name That Tune? Or look it up on Wikipedia if you don't. So we're going to play this song. And
do I get to play? Because I'm going to be so good at this.
People in the audience are like, I know what it is.
Dance. Nobody wants to see that. No.
So, Amber, can you name that tune?
This is Walking on Broken Glass by Annie Lennox.
Yes, it is.
I can sing it, too, if you want a real treat.
We were hoping you were going to volunteer to sing. But so, what does Annie Lennox and Walking on Broken Glass have to do with Lady Be Good?
I'm so glad you asked. So,
there we go.
The inspiration for Lady Be Good actually came to me in a very unusual way. And I in the past, I've gotten inspiration for my novels from dreams, which is very nice. They just sort of come to me. And but that wasn't the case with Lady Be Good. With Lady Be Good, I was on my drive to work and listening to... Oh, I know that one too. Yay. I told you I'm going to win. So I was driving to work and listening to Annie Lennox because she's the best. And Walking on Broken Glass came on, and I don't know how many of us are from the MTV VH1 generation, but it had a fabulous video that went with it. And
when videos instead of reality shows.
When it was music on music television, imagine. So I had this image in my head, fully formed, of the character that would become Kitty, and she had these platinum blonde curls, and and a big swing skirt on, and a mischievous smile. And I thought, I would follow her anywhere. I want to know what she's going to get up to. So Kitty came of her own volition, which is pretty perfect for Kitty. For those of you who've read it, I'm sure you would agree. But and then I had a conversation with my agent, and we were very friendly, and she was telling me about a funeral that she had gone to on Long Island, this incredibly wealthy woman who had passed away, and had all of these wild stories about her. But one of the stories that she was telling me, she said, and can you imagine, her father owned a lot of hotels, and when she was growing up, she lived in the penthouse of these hotels, and she would move from hotel to hotel. And apparently she was pretty mischievous herself. One of the stories that I really loved about her that I couldn't find a way to work into the novel was that she and her younger sister liked to smoke, and so they would go out onto the balcony, and when they would see their mother marching across the living room toward them, they would lock the door to the patio so that their mother couldn't come out and stop them from. And I thought, what a great story. But yeah, those two, for some reason, that character and those stories, I thought, what an amazing upbringing, what a strange world to live in, to grow up in hotels. And that was really the beginning of Kitty's story.
Well, we had a little bit of a sneak snippet come on too. There's only 2 songs too, so we'll play this.
Then I am definitely going to win this game. This is so good.
So, Maestro, if you'll play this. Anybody in the audience remember?
I can honestly listen to the whole thing. Yeah, you're cheating. You're a ringer. You can't answer. It is from Carmen. Yeah,
it is from Carmen.
So it's Habanera from Carmen by Bizet, and I'm so glad I wore my music skirt. This is so perfect.
I feel like this is if you were to do the movie version of Lady Be Good, like anytime Kitty entered the room, it would be
that song. Isn't that her soundtrack? I mean, with all of that bluster and confidence. This song actually plays a really pivotal role in the story, and it's because Kitty meets a musician, Max, who is part of the band at her father's Miami hotel. He has a club adjacent to each one of his hotels, and he installs a house band. And, so Kitty and Max meet each other and immediately sort of bounce off of each other. They conflict, and it's partly because they are so well matched and intellectually and in a lot of other ways. And Kitty is not used to people who are sort of her equal in that regard. And so it causes a lot of friction, but friction causes sparks. So there's a scene where Max sits down with her at a piano and they're having a conversation, and he teaches her how to play part of Habanera. And that is the moment, I think, where Kitty really... her mind starts to change about Max, and she starts to think of him in a slightly different way. And he asks her, does she know what the words mean? Because he doesn't know what the words... She stands up and sings part of the song, and she says, no, I took Latin in high school, but it's a lie. She knows exactly what it means, and it says, if I love you, take guard yourself. So... when I was looking up the song earlier, it said another translation was "If I love you, beware." Yes, and it is a song that comes up again at the end of the novel. It's a very important one for Max and Kitty's relationship. So
right, okay, no more songs. Good job, you won. Well, the game was rigged. This book starts out in 1953. 1953, and it goes to 1954. What about this time period was so attractive to you?
Well, so the 50s, initially I had thought of setting it in the 1940s, and then it quickly became apparent to me that if you're going to set a novel in the 1940s, that the war is going to loom very large. And the war is going to have to be a big piece of what you talk about. You have either the people who are living through the war, you have the people who are immediately, after the war, and still dealing with the aftermath. And so I started to look at the 50s. And the 50s are such an interesting decade because we have such a nostalgia for that era. And it is a time of relative peace and relative prosperity in America, but it depends on who you are. And that aspect of it really struck me as important and worthy of digging into and worthy of discussion. That, yes, the 1950s was a fabulous time and for a lot of people, but for other people it was maybe not so great. And there was a specific event I started to look at, especially the influx of Latino immigrants coming in to the United States during that time from Puerto Rico, mostly in New York, and then also from Cuba and other Latin American countries. And they faced an enormous amount of discrimination, especially in New York. New York was fairly hostile to especially the Puerto Rican immigrants. I mean, we've all seen West Side Story. We know, and they fight and so and snap at each other. So. But it reached such a fever pitch that a Puerto Rican woman actually went to Congress and shot tend to vilify the whole group of immigrants that were coming in, and it was a real powder keg. And I ended up not being able to use it in the novel because of the timing that I chose. It was later in 1954 that happened, but by that time, that story had already taken root in my mind. The story of the immigrants coming in and the treatment. And then out of that actually came the character of Max, who is Jewish and from Miami. He was born in Miami, but he plays largely, he plays a lot of popular music, but it's a Latin band, essentially, and he plays with Cuban musicians and other Latin musicians. And that was because I ran across a man named Irving Fields. And if you haven't heard of Irving Fields, please do yourself a favor and look him up. There were quite a few Jewish musicians who gravitated toward Latin music and started playing with Latin bands, but Irving Fields was arguably one of the most successful at that. And he made his mark by singing traditional Jewish music against a Latin backdrop, against a Latin beat, and he would name his albums accordingly. So there's a great image that I have of his album, Bagels and Bongos. They just go together so naturally.
That sounds
you can
like
hear,
a crowd pleaser. Yeah.
I mean, it's fabulous. And so I watched, there's a 2.5-hour documentary interview with him near the end of his life in his 90s. He played until he was 99 years old. He played on the last day that he lived. And I just missed him. He passed away about a month before I had the opportunity to go to New York. So I would have loved to have met him and told him, how incredible I thought he was. But you can find the documentary on YouTube. He's a really cool character and has lots of great stories, as you can imagine. So
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit. We've talked about music. I've kind of drug you all over through the book, and then the time period. But let's talk a little bit about the characters. We have Kitty, who we've talked about, our protagonist, who is the hotel owner's daughter, and her father is Nick Tesler. And class and society play a big role in this book because Nick is and has come from a self-made family. And Kitty isn't quite sure that sets well with her, that's what she wants her life to look like. She's 25 at the time. Mm-hmm. So how did you weave that in? Did you always know that this was going to be a book about class?
I did, and it was precisely because of Kitty's setup and Kitty's story and background. And Kitty, begins the novel with these ambitions that she's going to be at the top of the social ladder, that she's going to join those old money, old name families in New York and really be somebody. And she has a strong motivator for wanting that. She feels like that will make her untouchable. She has faced some discrimination, maybe not as much as other characters, for her Russian immigrant background. Her grandfather immigrated from Russia. Russians were not terribly popular in 1953, so she has to do a lot of work to atone for her heritage and be a part of the crowd that she feels like she belongs in. And but her father is a self-made man, and he's very proud of that history. And so there's a little bit of understanding that Kitty needs to come to about who she is and where she comes from. Kitty is a piece of work.
Yeah.
She is a piece of work. And I love her for that. I love that. And it was really fun to write this character who is maybe not the easiest person to love. I mean, she has these ambitions that are centered on money, that are centered on class. And I love to explore the growth, particularly of women characters. And in order for her to grow, she had to come from somewhere. She couldn't have started out being perfect. And so a lot of her journey was about discovering that social class doesn't make you who you are, and in fact that there's a whole big wide world out there beyond the penthouses of Manhattan. So that was very much the heart of the story from the beginning, and then it sort of grew tendrils and grew roots as I started to write about the other characters and their own relationships with class.
Yeah, I think this book resonates too because some of the issues that we're talking about in 1953, 1954 feel relevant today in terms of how we're all in our own little bubbles, our own silos. You know, we all know those people who live in New York who've never been outside of New York, and that's Kitty in this book.
Yeah.
She's never been anywhere else, but she is presented with an opportunity to travel to one of her father's other hotels in what city?
Yeah,
In
Miami.
Miami.
Who wouldn't go to Miami? I'd go right now.
Yeah, and Emmy Carmichael, one of the booksellers at Acapella, and I were talking about how this book just, it's a whole different feel once they get to Miami, and they also visit Cuba. Mm-hmm. So can you talk about how you learned about Miami and Cuba in 1953?
Yeah, so I get asked a lot because I write about places that I don't live, and so I get asked if I travel to those places when I write about them, and absolutely not, because I'm writing about them in a different era, and so I always want my encounters with those places to be with the places in that era. So I do an enormous amount of research into what those places were like in that era. I look at maps, I look at photographs to get a real sense of what things look like. With Miami, I was very lucky because there are people's old home videos of trips through South Florida and Miami on YouTube, and so I'm sure that nobody thought that anybody was ever going to watch those, but I watched them, and they were great. They're not entertaining, but they were really good for research purposes. So, it's somebody's, grandma and grandpa and cousins walking on the beach in Miami in 1954, and I'm getting that ground level view. So, it was interesting how I came to land on Miami because it was a function of the research in the 1950s, and so and really going back to the 40s and 30s and 20s and thinking about if you're a savvy hotel developer and you've got properties in New York and you want to expand, where are you going to go? And I was led to Miami because there were GIs who were stationed in Miami in World War II on South Beach, and quite a few of them were stationed in those hotels that were already there, and loved it so much because, of course, who wouldn't love to be stationed in South Beach, during World War II? And so when the war ended, they would bring their families back, and that was really what started the push in tourism into South Florida, and for average people, middle class people, because the upper class had already had access to Florida for quite some time, but it was such a long distance and so expensive that it was prohibitive unless you had lots of money. And then once those hotels started springing up and people started coming more frequently and more hotels get built, and so I thought, well, yeah, if you're building in the 1940s, where are you going to build? You're going to build in Miami. And then I had a Cuban character, mm-hmm. and I really wrestled with whether or not the characters should go to Cuba. And in my original conception, they didn't. They just stayed in Miami, and I thought, no, I can accomplish everything that I need in Miami. But I so fell in love with the character of Sebastian, the Cuban musician in Max's band, and I wanted the opportunity to spend more time with him and to really explore where he came from and his story. But the reason I was so hesitant is because even though the Cuban Revolution really wouldn't start in full effect until the end of the 1950s, in the fall of 1952 was when Castro and his comrades invaded an army barracks and were imprisoned for that. And so the stirrings of the Cuban Revolution had already begun, and it was a fairly dangerous place to be, even while it was a very popular tourist destination. And Kitty definitely encounters some of that danger while she's there.
Right. And she has an opportunity in both of these cities to actually leave the hotel property.
Yes.
And go to
Which
restaurants.
She doesn't do that much in New York.
Yeah.
Where she lives.
She's definitely like Eloise. And she lives in the hotel and doesn't really leave. But she goes to places that she would never be caught dead in before, or wouldn't want people to know that she had been to?
The Pickin' Chicken.
The Pickin' Chicken. I love that. I saw on social media the other day that somebody said, I'm reading this book and it makes me want to. There is a real Pickin' Chicken?
There is a real Pickin' Chicken. Again, Max is enjoying challenging Kitty. He sees her for who she is, and so he suggests that they go out for lunch, and she says, sure. So he says, well, maybe don't dress too nice, and oh no, where am I going? And so he takes her to the Pickin' Chicken, which was a real restaurant in Miami in the 50s. Unfortunately, it's no longer there. I would go with all my heart. All they have is fried chicken. And as I was looking for places for them, I always like for my characters to go to real restaurants. I always like for them to go to real places that really existed, and not invent places for them to go. I had someone say, oh, that's such a clever thing, the chicken restaurant with the chicken menu and the chicken placemat. I said, I'm not that clever. That's all real. So the place and I found pictures of the placemat. I found pictures of the menu. It was a chicken-shaped menu. I guess they were afraid you were going to forget what was going on. And, of course, it's just the last place on earth Kitty would ever want to go. And, of course, she falls in love with fried chicken. And, I mean, who wouldn't? So, I got a little obsessed with the Pickin' Chicken.
She was used to going to the nightclub and getting dressed and every night. And then all of a sudden, she just wanted to go to the Pickin' Chicken.
I mean, just eat some chicken with her hands.
Yeah. I love that. Well, speaking of chicken, let's talk about Hen.
Oh, Hen!
I love Hen. This is Kitty's best friend.
I don't want to sound. I hope it doesn't sound. I love her.
Yeah.
So much. So I'm glad you do too.
When you were writing this friendship, did you think at all about Scarlett and Mellie?
It occurred to me later. My inspiration was Jane and Elizabeth Bennet.
That's another one. Jane Austen definitely comes through in your book.
I shamelessly stole from her, so that's why. There's shades of Emma in there as well. Emma Woodhouse, handsome, rich, and clever. But it did occur to me later, Scarlett and Melanie, someone made the comparison, and I love that movie. And so I'm sure subconsciously in there somewhere, Scarlett and Melanie had gotten in there. But it's interesting because initially I had conceived of Hen as sort of a sidekick, as sort of someone who's enthralled to Kitty, who's in awe of Kitty. And sometimes they just take on their own life and they want to be who they want to be. And Hen became so interesting to me. And she ended up having her own full story. It just happens to be happening in the background of Kitty's story, but she has her own real character arc. She grows and changes, and it's her own independent thing. But she has her own battles that Kitty doesn't face. That they're very different people, but they love each other. And much like Scarlett and Melanie, their relationship started when they were very young. And it was so much fun to explore what happens when you have a very close friend and then you grow up together. Because when you're growing up, you're obviously growing and changing. And how does that relationship change? And how do you renegotiate that? And then, of course, Melanie is so wonderful and sweet. And she pretty much puts up with about everything Scarlett has to dish out. But Kitty makes a pretty monumental mistake with Hen. She really messes up, and it was fun to explore, like, how do you negotiate those relationships whenever somebody really goofs, and somebody, how do you decide if you want that person in your life?
Well, these are two women who have grown up in very different home lives.
Mm-hmm.
Kitty's family, again, they're considered nouveau riche, self-made. Hen's family was, born with a silver spoon, and so they're both very aware of their roles and what they're supposed to do in society, but at the same time, they pretend that they're not aware of it. It's a really interesting thing that you've done with them when you read the book. So it's very much. We were talking again about the book on Monday, and it was like, oh, it's like Emma, or it is Jane Austen. Are you a Jane Austen fan?
I am the biggest Jane Austen fan, and I will challenge any comers. I love her. I just finished actually rereading Sense and Sensibility because that's probably it's my favorite until I pick up Emma again, and then Emma's my favorite. But I love what she does with relationships. I love how she presents people's foibles. I love how she comments on society. And so yeah, I just steal from her because that's what I'm doing too. So it's just easier to plagiarize. Yeah.
Your first book, A Fine Imitation, takes place in a different time period. Lady Be Good takes place in the 1950s. Do you think of yourself as an historical fiction writer? Do you consider your books historical fiction?
I do, and I've explored lots of different time periods. I started writing several books before A Fine Imitation, and that was published, and I've written in lots of different eras. I have a novel set in medieval England, if anybody is interested in that. No? Nobody? So I jump around a lot. I'm a big history nerd, and I love that's the fun of historical fiction, is I love putting myself in that era and imagining what would it have been like to live in that time, and what would it have been like to experience that sort of on the ground. So I do have one novel that's about French royalty in the Renaissance, but most of the time I like writing about ordinary people and imagining what it would have been like for ordinary people. And I really don't like to write about real people because, I feel such respect for people's real stories. And I feel like when you're writing fiction that you have an obligation to make it interesting and spice it up. And I never want to do that with real people. And I know some historical authors take a lot of liberties, and that always makes me feel kind of funny because you're talking about someone who really lived. So, but yeah, and I think I'm a historical writer, but I think also I'm so committed to writing about women's stories and women's lives and the things that they experience. And I know that I have been variously shelved in both women's fiction and historical fiction because I think it really does bridge that gap.
Yeah, I asked the question because I was talking to somebody else on the podcast recently who didn't want her book to be called historical fiction. She was like, just because it takes place in a different time period doesn't make it historical fiction. It's like, okay. So
Fair enough. Yeah, to each his own. But I love the historical designation because I love history.
Yeah. Well, tell us a little bit about your writing life, because this isn't your full-time job at present.
No.
Nor is it most writers' full-time jobs.
Yes, it's true.
You're a teacher. When do you write? When do you find time to write, and what does that look like?
Whenever I can. That's the easiest answer. But when I started writing seriously, it was actually during a year off from teaching. And so I was able to devote lots of time to it. And then when I started teaching again, I would write in the summer and then edit during the school year because I had all this time in the summer. And now that I'm publishing and I have deadlines, and they don't always match up with the summer, it really can be a matter of go to school, teach all day, get home, write, and write until bedtime. And there was dinner in there somewhere, and I don't have any memory of it. And writing on the weekends, and it's an interesting balancing act because I also want to devote time to my students and to my teaching, and sometimes that follows me home too. So
of course. And what do they think of their teacher and her writing career?
Well, they're very sweet, and they're very indulgent with me when I talk about my writing, and they've been such wonderful supporters and such wonderful cheerleaders, and there are definitely times whenever I'm really mindful of the fact that I'm modeling something important for them, that I'm modeling how do you chase after the dreams that you have, and how do you strike that balance, and how do you have a life. And so yeah, they're just the best. I mean, my students are just the best, which is, I mean, like, I've been asked to, are you just waiting until, you can quit? And like, no, you've got to be kidding me, because there's a lot of publishing. I mean, it's incredible, and I'm so grateful for everything that I've had, but at the same time, there's a lot that's out of your control. There's a lot that has, that I'm really lucky that both of the times that my books have come out, they've timed it in the summer, because they don't care. Like, they don't care that I'm teaching and I've got other things to do. So, because they've got books to put out. So it's lovely and wonderful to go somewhere every day and spend time with people who are so interesting and so amazing, and to feel so grounded and feel like I'm making a difference in their lives every day in some small way. It's really nice, because the trail of publishing is very long. It takes a very long time to see results. It takes a very long time for the machine of publishing to move. And I can go every day and do something that is fulfilling and meaningful to me, which is really lovely.
Do you have any advice for aspiring or working writers?
Find the balance, and find something about writing that's just for you, and hang on to that, because again, so much of it is out of the writer's control. If you're trying to publish, it's so important to find something about it that you love that's just for you, and that nobody else can touch. And you don't always have to spend every evening and every weekend that you forgive yourself on those days
feel
when
like
it's
you have
hard.
to show up every single day.
You don't have to
6
show up
a.m.
every day. Yeah, and I know a lot of writers advise writing every single day, and if that works, then that's wonderful. But for me, I have to be really kind to myself in order for my writing, when I do sit down, to be good and to be proud of it.
Are you writing something right now? What are you working on now?
I am sporadically at the moment, but I'm currently writing in 1940s Hollywood, which I love, because I am an old movie buff. And it's a sort of mystery. So a young costumer who gets taken under the wing of a big name star, a Betty Davis, Joan Crawford type, and sort of unexpectedly finds herself under this star's mentorship. And she says, "I'm going to make you my dresser. I want you to make me clothes." And it's a little strange, but they're eccentric and whatever. And so she arranges for her to room with an up-and-coming starlet, very Marilyn Monroe type. And one night the costumer comes home to find the starlet is disappeared, and no one knows what's happened to her. And she quickly realizes she was the last person to see her, and she had better try to figure out what happened, or she's going to be suspect number one.
Ooh, so there's a mystery.
There's a mystery.
I like it. Well, I want to make sure that I open up to questions from our audience tonight. Anybody have any questions for Amber?
It's a great question. So how, in the process of writing, do I create my characters? Do I define them? Do I let them take their own path? So I do a lot of planning, a lot of preparation. I'm a planner extraordinaire. And so I find that I do a lot of planning, and then they sort of, once I get into the narrative, they sort of take off on their own and become who they're going to be. One thing that I do that I think really helps in terms of getting a handle on the characters and being able to put them in the world is I always cast them. I use an actor or an actress as a model, and then I can hear their voice, and then I can see their mannerisms, and then I put them all together, and I let them surprise me in terms of what they want to do or what they want to say. So it's a little of both. Thank you.
Well, I guess my follow-up question to that would be, I mean, we talked about the Annie Lennox song and the woman in the video. So who did you cast in the roles for Lady Be Good?
So I'm going to need some help, and because her name's going to escape me, but Emma, it's one of the Emmas.
Emma
Stone. Emma Stone,
Okay.
yes, is the person who I was picturing for Kitty, because she has that great wide smile and that great, what do I care attitude. But she's a little goofy. It was sort of perfect. And then for Max, it's very niche, so I don't know if everybody's going to know, but Jake Johnson, he's been in some movies. I feel like he was in a big movie recently, but he's Nick on New Girl. If you've ever watched the TV show New Girl, that's who I was picturing. Very flinty, very sarcastic, just perfect for Max. And it's interesting because I was using a model for Sebastian, and then it didn't work at all. And so I sort of had to embellish a lot. But that's an actor from the television show Jane the Virgin.
That's my absolute favorite TV show.
It's so amazing. But I was totally picturing Rogelio, which meant that he was way too much in the first draft. He was way too silly and way too crazy, and so then I had to tone him down a lot. And then for Hen, I used Meryl Streep's daughter, Mamie Gunner, who is a very sort of classical beauty and looks really lovely with the long ringlets, and so that's my main cast there. And then Stanley Tucci, if he's available, can play Kitty's dad, Nick.
All right.
Yeah. Well, I'll give him a call. We'll work it out.
Okay, more questions, or I'm just going to keep asking. So,
I liked the fact, I didn't like the fact that she only had one parent, but I found that really interesting, and the dynamic between Kitty and her dad. I think it would have not worked had the mother been part of our life, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. And that relationship became so central to the story that I was telling, and that was unexpected too. And he was initially, in the initial concept, Kitty's father is sort of an obstacle. And then as I started writing about them, I thought, but these people only really have each other at the end of the day, and so their relationship changed dramatically in my mind. And of course, no spoilers, but the Kitty's mother and the memory of Kitty's mother is one of the big motivators for her. There's a very specific memory that she has tied in with her mother's death that eventually, that kind of spurs her on. So that was certainly important that her mother not be there. That wouldn't work otherwise. But in the end, it was so interesting to develop that relationship between father and daughter. And I had someone recently say, I expected that she was going to manipulate him or take advantage of him or really not have a lot of respect for him because of who she was, and yet she does. They have this incredible close relationship. So I was glad to defy expectations in that way.
And then Hen and her mother.
The battle axe? Is that who you're referring to?
Kitty had kind of a longing for that, didn't she?
Yeah, I think Kitty really saw Hen's mom as a model, and like I say, she's not a good person, so not a great model. But the things that Kitty's aspiring to, in Hen's mother's life, she really thinks are worthwhile in the beginning, and that was always it's like, no, it's the package deal. Like, if you want the good things that she has, you have to think about the bad things that are going to come along with that.
That's a great character.
Thank you.
Emma, let me ask you this. I'm convinced you do fabulous research, but I'm fascinated by 54, which was 25 years before you were born. How does going back and watching old movies on YouTube put you in that area. I'm sure it does, but how does that research work?
So yeah, how does the research process actually put me in 54? So the home movies were a piece of it, but I also we're very fortunate to have a librarian in the family who sent me a lot of oral histories. I read a lot of oral histories, particularly of Havana and Miami and the music scene in Miami, and I've just always been one of those people who can pick up on details and then use those details to craft a narrative. Because the nice thing, and as a student of history, again, I have a medieval novel if anybody's interested. But as someone who deeply loves history and loves going really far back in history, one of the things that I've discovered is that people are always people. And they might be living different experiences, they might be living through different events, they might have different worldviews, but ultimately, at the end of the day, they all fall in love, they all get angry, they all get sick, and so it really is a combination of finding what's unique for a certain era and unique for a certain person's experience, and then combining that with what do we all live through and how do we all react to the world. Thank you.
I wondered as I was reading this, Amber, how things would have been different if the roles had been reversed between Kitty and Max. Because Kitty she's got a plan. Like, she's planning her every move. And part of her plan is like, I'm going to use this guy to make somebody else feel to do certain things. To act, or she's always playing in the different relationships, and one of them was these are party people. They're going to the club every night and they're drinking cocktails everywhere they go, and she said something about how booze helped with her plans. And
booze always helps.
Yeah, booze was part of her plan, and I just was like, did it ever occur to you that this might not work? If we were talking about a man who was saying, "Yeah, booze is part of my plan to manipulate the opposite sex," and do you think that you were able to take extra liberties because of the time period?
Oh, definitely.
Would this work in 2018?
Yeah, I mean, I think gender swapped, that would be a very uncomfortable moment. If Max were going to ply Kitty with alcohol to get what he wants, that was part of the exciting thing with working with this particular female character in this particular setting, because there are definitely moments where Kitty absolutely does not stand for things that might have been tolerated by other women, things that still, there's a moment where some guys come up to her in a bar and they say, well, we bought your drinks, so now we get a dance. And Kitty, no, absolutely you don't. I mean, she's very much the master of her own fate. Which is, I think something that we can see, that women don't always take that sort of agency and say, nope, you know what, thanks for the drink, I really enjoyed it, now buzz off. So I was very conscious of how she uses that power, and and the fact that even, that poor hen is sitting there and saying, well, they did buy us a drink, shouldn't we? And Kitty says, absolutely not, I'm going to run them off. So, it felt timely, but it would not be the same at all if Max were in Kitty's shoes. So
yeah, and I was listening to an interview earlier with somebody who was saying that sometimes our society, not sometimes, most of the time, our society has problem with ambitious women, and I wondered, as people have read the book and have gotten to know Kitty now, knowing that she is, kind of a master, planner and everything, would we feel different if this were a male character who were trying to, achieve, climb the social ladder and achieve the things that she's doing?
Yeah, and I think that it's so interesting to me, and it's why I always set out to write female protagonists who are thorny and who are tough to love, because I absolutely, I don't want them, to fit into the mold and to be always nice and saying the right thing and doing the right thing. And I mean, I think anybody who has met Kitty knows that that's not Kitty. But because I don't think we have enough female protagonists who are thorny, and who we have plenty of male protagonists who are unfriendly, unhelpful, difficult to love. I mean, even if you, I mean, not just in novels. I mean, I can think of lots of examples. I don't want to throw anybody on the bus.
Not just in fiction, but nonfiction too.
Yes, yeah. And well, I can say Catcher in the Rye, I can say Holden Caulfield, but we're constantly presented with male characters in television, Walter White, Don Draper, and they're not good people, and yet they get a pass that female characters do not get. And there is a high bar for female characters of likability. They have to be likable. And I won't name names, but even in some of the feedback that I've gotten, Kitty's not very likable. Okay, well, good, because that was what I was setting out to do. And I'll borrow a phrase that we use with our students quite frequently, that she's not likable yet. You have to give her time, right? She has to grow. She has to become who she's going to be. So that yet is really powerful, and we don't really give women a lot of space to find their yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The choir says amen.
Preach.
Well, do you read while you're writing? You said that you just reread Sense and Sensibility.
That was my treat.
That was your treat.
Yes.
But I'm always wondering, if you're writing historical fiction, can you read other books in your genre while you're writing?
Not while I'm writing. I do deliberately stay away from women's fiction, historical fiction, while I'm writing, especially things that have come out very recently. But I read an enormous amount of nonfiction. I love nonfiction. In fact, my husband and I just got done on our road trip listening to, was it like 13 hours, that book? It was a very long book. The Victoria, it felt longer. It was fabulous. It was fascinating, but it was a history of the 7 people who made attempts on Queen Victoria's life. And it was a deep dive on each potential assassin and what was going on in the criminal world and in the judicial world around that time. If you think that sounds fascinating, then we're going to be friends. If you think that sounds really boring, it wasn't, I promise. But I'm constantly listening to nonfiction or reading nonfiction. I really love it, and it always, of course, sparks ideas. So. Yeah.
Well, I think we're going to wrap things up because we have some Kitty Libre drinks. If you haven't already sampled one, we've got all kinds of wonderful cocktails from the folks at Wrecking Bar, and Acapella is selling copies of Lady Be Good here. Amber, would you be open to signing some books?
Would love to.
So they make excellent gifts. And it's such a good book. Thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Thanks so much.
And now that I've re-listened to our interview, I feel like kind of a dip because we played the Name That Tune game and overlooked probably the most important song reference in the book, which is the title of Lady Be Good. It's a reference to a song by George and Ira Gershwin that's now associated with Ella Fitzgerald because of her legendary performance. Amber writes that she loves the line from Lady Be Good that says, "I am so awfully misunderstood," because that's how Kitty sees herself at the beginning of the novel. Thank you again to Acapella Books and the Wrecking Bar Brew Pub for hosting us. If you are interested in being a part of the next Writers at the Wrecking Bar, again, that date is August 23rd, and I have the honor again of being in conversation with Christopher Swan about his book, Shadow of the Lions, and Amy Bonifant about her short story collection, Wrong Heaven. That's August 23rd at the Wrecking Bar Brew Pub. Now, going back to see Amber Brock. Now that you're all caught up, you can go and see her live at the AJC Decatur Book Festival. It looks like she's going to be in conversation with author Lisa Patton Saturday at 5:30. Socialites and sororities. So Kitty's going to be in good company during this panel. This is Saturday, September 1st at 5:30 p.m. at the AJC Decatur Book Festival. To see a full list of all of the presenters and sessions and start working on your Decatur Book Festival schedule, go to decaturbookfestival.com. Looking ahead to other book events that are happening this week in Atlanta, this Saturday, August the 11th at 2 p.m., actress Amber Tamblyn has written a controversial first novel called Any Man. She's going to be discussing the book and signing copies at Acapella Books. Again, that's happening Saturday, August the 11th at 2 p.m. Also happening this weekend, it's the Great Karis Readathon. Karis Books and More. It's been around for 44 years, and this is an epic readathon. Check out karisbooksandmore.com, the Celebrate Great Karis Readathon, to find out more details about how you can support the bookstore through one of the readers participating in the marathon read. Or you can stop by the store with your kids between 12 and 5 on Saturday and listen to Karis co-owner Angela Gabriel read aloud 100 children's books in an epic feat of storytime strength. I love that, you guys. You can donate to the store with cash or credit card. Next Tuesday, August the 14th, don't miss J. Courtney Sullivan at the Margaret Mitchell House. She'll be there to talk about her new book, Saints for All Occasions. That's happening Tuesday, August the 14th at 7 p.m. As always, admission for lectures is $10 for the general public, $5 for members, and free to Atlanta History Center insiders. And finally, the last event I'll tell you about will also serve as a tease for next week's episode of the Literary Atlanta podcast. The Georgia Center for the Book will welcome Delia Owens to the Decatur Library Auditorium on August the 15th at 7:15 p.m. Delia is the New York Times bestselling author of several nonfiction books. This is her first novel, Where the Crawdads Sing. Again, I will have an interview with Delia Owens in the next episode of Literary Atlanta. Remember, when you can, support these local booksellers and the authors they're hosting by buying a copy of the book at the event. Thanks for listening to this episode. As always, you can find links to the people, books, and events mentioned in the podcast on our website at literaryatlanta.com. You can listen to episodes there or download them wherever you like to get your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Radio Public, or TuneIn. I'm Allison Law, your host. Until next time, take care and stay lit curious.